My name is Mike Morford. Some of you may know me as co-host of the podcast Criminology. I'd like to tell you about a solo podcast that I host, which is very close to my heart. It's called The Murder in My Family. We've all heard about horrible murder cases in the news, both solved and unsolved. Most of the time, we listen for a moment and then go about our daily routine. But have you ever wondered who those murder victims were? Or thought about their backgrounds? They're more than a blurb in the news or a statistic. They were real people living real lives. They were someone's child, parent, sibling, or friend. In The Murder in My Family, I try to get to know those victims with the help of the people that knew them best, their family members. Together, we talk about the lives and tragic deaths of their loved ones, as well as the ripple effect the murders had on surviving friends and family. Some of the episodes feature high-profile cases you're probably familiar with, like the Colonial Parkway murders, the Delphi murders, or the Golden State Killer murders. But many other cases are ones from small towns all over America that barely made the news. There are dozens of episodes of The Murder in My Family available right now to binge on. Subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
Hey everyone, it's Jen.
And this is Lindsay.
And welcome back to Corpus Delicti, the podcast.
We have no scheduled time off right now. I know we just got back from a break, had 3 episodes, and then I went out of town again. So apologies for that. But we should be good for a little while until the holidays, but we also have a plan for that as well. So we are going to dive right into this week's episode because there is a lot to cover. But before we start, we want to give a huge shout out to Charley from Crime Lines on this one. She helped us with this. She had covered this on Insight, which was her other podcast, which she no longer has. She covered it a while back, but she was gracious enough. It's actually kind of a ironic story how this happened because I was doing research on newspapers.com, and when you're going through the articles, if someone clipped a part of the article, it'll show you the usernames of people who clipped it. And I saw on there that there was someone with the username Charley from KC. And I was like, I know a Charley who lives in Kansas City. And then I was like, wait a minute, this is a true crime case. I bet it's Charley. And I sent it to her just kidding. And I was like, is this you? This is you. And she was like, that's really me. Anyway, so she was gracious enough to help us and give us some information that she had from her old script. So thank you, Charley.
Yeah, and not to mention, Charley is above and beyond one of the nicest, sweetest people you will ever meet.
Yes, she is.
I don't click with people very often, but I clicked with Charley pretty quickly.
Jen doesn't give hugs, but she has now hugged Charley twice in front of me.
Aww.
Anyway, she's great. Crime Lines is a fantastic podcast, but like I said, we're going to dive right in.
All right, it's strange enough when one person disappears. 3 seems just downright impossible, but yet here we are. Let's go back to 1992 in Springfield, Missouri, when this all happened. The case is known as the Springfield 3, or the 3MW, the 3 missing women.
Stacy McCall was 18 years old, and Suzanne, Suzie, she went by Suzie sometimes, Streeter, was 19, and they were recent high school graduates. They just went through the graduation ceremony on Saturday, June 6th of 1992 from Kickapoo High School. The 2 were close friends when they were younger, but they did kind of drift apart for a little while. And this graduation, them hanging out, was them rekindling that friendship. When they started to kind of grow apart, it wasn't that they were on bad terms or anything. They just drifted. Suzie did hang out with a little bit of the rougher crowd, and that's where they just kind of parted ways. And then at the graduation ceremony and at all the parties, they're talking about good times, and they decide to start hanging out again.
There are several graduation parties happening to celebrate this graduation, and this is a huge accomplishment. We're going to skip to 2:15 a.m. on June 7th, 1992. Now, this is the graduation season. They're at parties. The 2 friends had left a party in a nearby community. Suzie had arrived around 8 p.m. and they were actually going to spend the night at another friend's house. But ultimately, they determined that there are just too many people there. Whether it's bed space, whether it's crashing space, they decided to go somewhere else. In fact, the party they were at before they were going to go to their friend's house got broken up by the police. Minors are drinking and the streets were blocked with cars and lots of noise complaints. They decided to go to Suzie's house at 1717 East Delmar, Springfield. This was actually a new house to them because Suzie's mom, Sherrill Levitt, had just purchased it about 2 months prior. A little history here. Sherrill was divorced from her first husband, Brent Streeter. They split shortly after Suzie was born. She also had a son named Bart, who's about 9 years older than Suzie. Suzie actually lived with Bart for a little while in early 1992. Keep in mind, she was already over 18, and this is because she was held back a year in school. This was pretty short-lived as Bart had some pretty strong drinking habits.
Sherrill actually remarried Don Levitt, and they too divorced in 1989. Going through this, as so many know, it can impact your finances. And this is when she decided to buy this house, which was a little bit on the smaller side. And when we say that it impacted her finances, Don's creditors were actually coming to Sherrill to pay his debts. Obviously, she's like, I shouldn't have to pay his debts. So she hired a lawyer. But the lawyers weren't even able to find him. So he just goes off the grid and leaves her to deal with all this. So back to the girls and graduation night. The next day, after the parties and the sleepover, Stacy and Suzie were supposed to meet up at Whitewater, which is a water park in Branson, Missouri, with friends. This was about 45 minutes away. They were originally going to drive to Branson on this night, but they didn't want it to cut into their party time, so they decided they'd just drive up the next morning. So they were going to make that drive, stay in a hotel so that they were already close by when they woke up, but again, they decided to stay. So a bunch of the graduates were going to go to this water park, but the two friends never showed up. Their other friends became concerned because they hadn't called or anything, so they went by Suzie's house to check on them. This was Janelle Kirby and her boyfriend. They are the ones who stopped by.
When their friends arrived, the first thing that they noticed that there was a light on the front porch. It had been broken and glass was all around. They actually cleaned it up because they were trying to be nice. When they knocked on the door, nobody answered. But the front door was unlocked, so they kind of peeked their heads in and they went inside. At first, everything seems normal. It was clean, well kept. But Stacy and Suzie were nowhere to be found. Nor was Suzie's mom, Sherrill Levitt.
And real quick, I want to pause here. When we say that the light was broken, to be more specific, it was the globe around the light. The bulb was still intact, but that piece that goes around it is what was broken.
What's also weird about this, every indication pointed to the fact that they should have been there. All their cars are there. All of their purses are there. There's several $100s in cash sitting in Sherrill's purse. The keys to their cars were there. Sherrill and Suzie's cigarettes, and in Suzie's bathroom, a wet cloth with makeup was on it nearby, indicating they had come home, washed their faces. Her jewelry was sitting on the counter. Stacy's items are very neatly placed. Her shorts are folded, her jewelry is safely tucked into the pockets, and they sat on top of her sandals beside her bed. So it's like they were getting ready for night. They were getting ready to go to bed. Stacy took medication for migraines, which she had a lot, and her medication had not gone with her wherever she is, so she had left it there. Even the TV is still on in Suzie's room, and her blinds looked like somebody had just peeked out of them.
What really struck them as odd was the dog Cinnamon. Cinnamon was a smaller dog, and Cinnamon seemed to be upset and agitated. So Janelle and her boyfriend start by calling their other friends. Maybe there's some logical explanation. Maybe Sherrill had taken them, or, they couldn't take their cars for some reason, so Sherrill took them, or whatever it may be. But no one had seen or heard from them. As they were about to leave the house, the phone rings, and Janelle actually answered it because she's hoping to find out where they might be. Hey, we're not waiting on you. We're going to head down, that type of thing, because at this point, nothing is amiss except for the fact that their stuff is all there. So there was a man on the other end of the phone who started saying really inappropriate and lewd things. So she hung up, but then the phone rung again, and she's like, well, just in case it's them. She picks up, but this scenario repeated itself. So again, she hung up. So this random man calls and starts saying really inappropriate things twice. So Janelle and her boyfriend leave because they have daily plans. And again, there's probably some logical explanation, right? But now Janice McCall hasn't heard from her daughter, Stacy. Stacy was supposed to call her mother before they left for the water park. So that morning, she was supposed to call her mother. So she starts calling around, and no one has heard from her daughter either.
Later that evening, there was still no contact from Stacy. Even once the other students had returned from the water park, Janice went to Suzie's house with her 2 other daughters. Finally, the police were called after they felt confident that something was wrong. Police described it so eerie because there was literally nothing missing or out of place except for the 3 women missing. Sherrill's eyeglasses were on the bedside table with the book turned over, indicating that she possibly had been interrupted while reading. Unfortunately, the glass that the friends cleaned up may have been some of the only evidence there. Otherwise, there's nothing. And to be fair, no one really knew how bad it was until time kept going on. There had been several people in and out of the house at this point, even before the police came, which certainly would have messed up any forensic evidence that may have been there. So with all these people coming in and out, I mean, to be fair, it doesn't look like a crime scene. It just looks like they may have gone off with some friends and they're just wondering where they are.
But or taking a walk or something because their stuff is still there. They're like, that's not the first thing you leap to, especially when the 2 girls and the mother aren't there, because you assume that they're probably with the adult, or at least that would be the first inkling I had.
Right. I mean, your first thoughts don't jump to a nefarious situation, but now it is, because everyone's looking for them. And a massive search is started that involves a lot of the community. So they really pulled together to try to find these 3 women.
Neighbors said that they didn't hear anything strange that night, but pretty quickly the whole town and the surrounding areas were plastered with missing persons posters. And they were smart because they used bright yellow paper to print them on so that they would stand out. And here is the timeline that they were able to piece together for that evening. So bear with us here because there's lots of dates and times. So June the 6th, 6 p.m., graduation ends. At 7:30 p.m., a friend of Suzie's drops off a graduation cake for her at her house. 8:30 p.m., Suzie and Stacy show up at their first party of the night.
Sherrill's friend calls at her house, where she's refinishing a chair or painting a chest of drawers between 10:30 p.m. and 11:15. Sources vary on this, and it's the last time anyone has heard from Sherrill. We're going to skip to the next day, June 7th, but not too far in because it's just 1:30 in the morning. Suzie and Stacy appear at another block party on the 1500 block of East Hanover Street in Springfield just before 2 a.m. They go back to Janelle's house on their way to Suzie's. This is where they would sleep in her new king-size waterbed. The girls arrived to Suzie's house around 3 a.m. Now at 8 or 9 a.m., Janelle calls Suzie's house. There's no answer, and she leaves a message.
12:30 p.m., this is when Janelle and her boyfriend go to the house looking for Suzie and Stacy. 7 p.m., Janice shows up at the house prepared to take Stacy's belongings and take her car home. So then the investigation really begins. That was just kind of the preliminary information that they were able to gather. So now they start really digging in. Now, important note here before we get into a lot of this. We know that eyewitness testimony can sometimes be useful and other times not at all. It depends on the situation. It depends on how good of a look you got, how important that day, that moment was, how much you're paying attention. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it is not. So keep that in mind. So a witness calls in a few days later and says that on June 7th, they had seen someone matching Suzie's description driving an older green Dodge van, and the van had pulled into her next door neighbor's driveway. The woman who was driving seemed really scared, and the male in the van with her said, "Just turn around and get us out of here. Don't do anything stupid." But the witness did not see the male. Another man told police that he also saw a blonde woman driving a similar vehicle, and he thought something looked suspicious, so he wrote down the tag number. Really good move. But he accidentally threw the newspaper away before he was able to contact authorities. So he just grabbed a pen, wrote it on the newspaper, forgot he had written it down, and then tossed the newspaper away. But police are like, that could be key. We need that information. So they actually hypnotized this witness to see what he could remember, but it only led to the first 3 numbers on the plate. Now, in some states, that can be useful depending on how they do the plates. You can at least narrow it down to green Dodge van with this starting 3 numbers, and it can help, but it didn't narrow it down quite enough.
So they really don't know how accurate it is, or if really, in hindsight, is it even related? The owner of a convenience store, Apco A-Mart, came forward saying he had seen 3 women that night. According to the Springfield News leader, Steve Thompson, the manager, said that Suzie and Stacy came into the store around 10:30 p.m. in separate cars. Then he says 4 hours later, around 2:15-ish, Sherrill was in the store looking for her daughter. Now, was all of this actually them? Maybe, maybe not. Remember, it's a big graduation weekend. A lot of people are out late. A lot of people are going in and out of these stores. The story was on America's Most Wanted within a week. Within a week. So this is huge, right? America's Most Wanted was interesting because an anonymous person called in and they thought that this person had a very credible information to share. But the call was unintentionally disconnected. They begged and pleaded for the person to call them back, but they never did.
This is where you're just like, oh, because the newspaper, and I'm sure it was an accident. Everybody makes mistakes, but you're like, oh man, that license plate on the newspaper could have helped. This call could have helped, and nothing was intentional, but you're just like, oh man.
Going back to that newspaper, at what point do you, as a police officer, let's go dumpster diving?
Right. Where did you throw it away? Yeah, true. And they may have tried and it was, decomposed at that point. Newspaper's very flimsy. They may have. But
yeah.
Then 48 hours came in and they followed the police around for weeks. On June 14th, officers started searching these nearby apartments on Boulevard Road because someone left a letter in a newspaper rack at Smitty's, and the letter contained a rough drawing of that apartment complex with the phrase, quote, "use ruse of gas man checking for leak." So what they're thinking here is somebody has drawn out this map of the apartment complex and says, pretend to be a gas man checking for a leak. Well, why would someone do that? Maybe that's what happened to the 3 women. Some of the news sources say that this was a completely bogus tip, that they ended up discounting it, said it was no-go. But it was interesting because it seemed to be a possible explanation for why 3 women might step out of their house in the middle of the night. Now, this was at an apartment complex. This drawing was of an apartment complex, but could it have also happened elsewhere if someone had an MO?
Then police received another tip from several neighbors who saw a potentially homeless man near the home more than once a few days before the disappearance. He had long hair and a beard, and his sketch was released. But what's to note here is one caller told police she saw someone matching the sketch at Smitty's earlier the same day around 5:30 a.m., and it was weird because he was just lingering there. According to the Springfield News Leader, another neighbor just blocks away reported to police that around 1 a.m. on June 7th, she found a tall, thin man wearing a baseball cap peeping into her neighbor's window. She flipped on her kitchen light. The man turned and just left. And the next day, neighbors found broken plants and a pocket knife under the window, which, good for them, they gave that to the police.
So another thing that they do then is they take a photo of that Dodge van. And it was not obviously because they have not found that exact one, but they took a picture of what it would look like and they released that. And they're like, look, did anyone see this on this date? So they're really trying here. They're trying with what they have. Then another tip comes in, and a waitress at George's Steakhouse says that she saw the three women at the diner between 1 and 3 a.m. And it seemed as if Suzie was really happy or giddy, perhaps even drunk, and Sherrill was trying to calm her down. At least one source says that they were there with three men, but none of the other sources that we came across mentioned that. So not entirely sure if that was confirmed or not. So the police department, in short, is completely overwhelmed with the case because it blows up with all the media attention. I mean, it's 48 hours.
America's Most Wanted.
Yeah. And so they are getting calls, they're getting tips, and they're pulling a lot of overtime. They're doing searches by air, land, water. They're not finding anything noteworthy. And soon, to add to the publicity, the case is on Maury and Oprah.
They did look into Sherrill's two ex-husbands and her son, but they're all ruled out. They looked into the exes of Suzie's, one of whom she had gotten a protection order against because he was abusive. He is also ruled out. In 1997, Suzie and Sherrill were declared legally dead. Their official date of death was listed as June 8, 1997, which is exactly 5 years and 1 day from when they went missing. This is basically the soonest you can declare someone dead in Missouri, but tips continue to come in, and we'll get to all of those tips right after the break. All right, guys, welcome back from the break. So now let's cut a few years to 2002. Two women give a tip about two men who worked at the local concrete company and owned a site near Marshfield. They apparently drove a van similar to the one that had been described. These women said that the men just up and left Springfield after the disappearance. However, authorities weren't able to really confirm who these two men were. They did take cadaver dogs out to the area just to see if they could get a hit. They had two potential areas of interest. When they did dig, unfortunately and ultimately, nothing was found. And to be fair, if you're a person or a man around this time with a green van, this is blowing up all over your state.
Good for people for taking it seriously and turning in tips. You never know. And good for the police for actually looking into them, because we've heard so many times where they're overwhelmed or it takes too long to get to them. And I mean, this is years later, but yeah, still. So according to ky3.com, in April 2003, tips led investigators to a farmland south of Cassville. So they took backhoes, they dug huge holes, and they only managed to find two pieces of possible evidence. There was possible blood in the section of a green vehicle, which could have been like a piece from the green van witnesses say they saw back in 1992. So that's all they could find. Possible blood, but is it human? Is it animal? That takes extra testing. And a green vehicle, well, there's lots of green vehicles. So the blood evidence was inconclusive. They were not able to make a determination on that. And although Suzie and Sherrill have been declared dead, Stacy has not. And her mother says she will not do it until she has conclusive proof. She's essentially saying, I can't take that status of life away from my daughter, which I totally get. So now let's talk about some of the theories on this case, because 3 people absolutely boggles my mind.
So, one of the first theories is that the perpetrator, or the bad guy, took Cinnamon the dog out of the yard to sneak onto the property quietly, knocked on the door, pretended to have rescued the dog, and whoever opened the door was overpowered.
So either they could have used the dog to say, oh, I found your dog escaped, or could have taken the dog somewhere else so that the dog wasn't barking when the perpetrator snuck up to the house, and then left the dog in the house after whatever happened, so the dog wasn't then out in the yard barking and alerting neighbors. But next theory, Charley actually had an interesting theory about the light globe, that piece that we talked about around the light bulb. The bulb was still there. It was just that piece around it, right? So the light bulb itself still worked. So did someone smash that globe piece to alert the women so that they would come out and look to see what was going on? Because keep in mind, Suzie's blinds were open. It looked like somebody had peeked out of them. So were they peeking out? She says that maybe it's that, or either the person was trying to unscrew the light bulb so no one could see him or her, accidentally dropped it, and that's what alerted the women, and that's why the blinds were open.
There is a third theory out there that circles around Robert Craig Cox. He is a convicted kidnapper and robber who was in the Springfield area at the time that the women disappeared. He actually has been convicted of murder as well as received the death penalty, but he was later acquitted and never retried. He became a suspect because the murder victim's family never stopped watching his movements. They knew he had moved to Springfield, and then they saw what happened to these 3 women, so the family calls the police. But as we know, there's very little actual evidence in this case, so they asked him for his alibi. His girlfriend said that she was with him. However, she later recanted this and said he told her to lie for him. She came forward with this once they had broken up.
So an investigative reporter from KY3 actually interviewed Cox in 1990 when the following exchange occurred. So Cox says, I know that they're dead. I'll say that. And I know that. The reporter says, that's not a theory. Cox says, I just know that they're dead. That's not my theory. I just know that. There's no doubt about that. And then that was all he said. He shut down and would not give any more information. So a grand jury actually did deliberate over this, but ultimately no charges were ever brought for him. Another theory is Stephen Garrison. And Stephen Garrison was a habitual offender who was arrested for his quote-unquote third strike, and so he's facing a world of trouble. And if you're not familiar with the third strike rule in certain areas, 3 strikes, doesn't matter what it is, you're getting a really stiff punishment. In some places, life in prison. So 3 strikes, you're out. And he said that he would make a deal in exchange for information about the women. And he said that he was at a party and a drunk friend confessed to the crime. But what caught their attention is he did have one piece of information that no one had ever released before. Now, we don't know what that is. They have still kept that close, but he had something that was not known to the public. He said that they were buried on a piece of property in Webster County, and he also told them where the van could be found. So, of course, police are like, let's go find this. But they didn't find anything. They didn't find bodies. Now, they did take things from the search, but we do not know what that is. So could it still be related, but it's not enough to be that proverbial smoking gun? Don't know.
Sometime around 2007, the theory came about that the 3 women were buried under Cox South Hospital parking garage after a psychic had a vision. Eventually, a consulting engineer was hired and used ground-penetrating radar to scan the garage. The man running it said that his machine picked up 3 distinct objects. Based on size, they could have been graves, just meaning that the size was about right, but also It's a construction site. Springfield police looked into the theory, but found it not to be credible. The police never requested to destroy the parking garage concrete or searched under it, because the garage didn't exist until after the women went missing, and it's likely they would have been found during the construction.
So another topic that came up, and I don't even consider this a theory, is that Sherrill was into drugs and owed a huge drug debt because it was complete rumors. Police did check this out. It was discredited. And the theory actually caused a lot of rumors and hurt to the family because they're like, all Sherrill did was work. She went to work in the morning. She came back late at night. She was supporting her family on her own. They were like, she wasn't into that. And so I don't even consider that a theory because it was discredited. So over the years, a total of 5,000 tips have come in and 27,000 documents have been generated on this case. And they even still get a couple of tips a month. And the McCalls, Stacy's family, has been very vocal about how this affected them. And Stacy had 2 other sisters, and they all looked very similar. And we talked about them when her mother, Janice, first went over to the house with her 2 other daughters. But their sisters, I can't imagine, they looked very much alike. And so they would get stared at in public because people were trying to decide, is that Stacy? Is that the missing girl? And then it just brought back all those feelings every time it happened. And naturally, their mother instantly became anxious if anyone in the family was even a minute late getting home. Can't imagine, of course. I would absolutely be the same way.
Now, just to go over some of the physical characteristics of each one of the ladies that went missing, Sherrill Levitt, she was born November 1st, 1944. She's 5 foot. She's 110 pounds, brown eyes, short, bleached blonde hair, naturally curly, longer on top and it was shorter in the back, thin build, and had freckles on her neck and upper chest area. She was 47 at the time of her disappearance. She worked at the New Attitudes hair salon with a client book of over 250 people. She was the best in the area.
Stacy McCall is a white female born April 23rd of 74, 5'3", 120 pounds, blue eyes, dark blonde hair to the middle of her back with sun-lightened ends. She has freckles on her face and a dimple in the middle of her chin, which is described as an off-center cleft. She also has birthmarks on her chin near her lip and on her right arm. She has pierced ears. And Stacy was set to attend Southwest Missouri State University in the fall. She was working as a secretary when she disappeared, and she also modeled wedding gowns.
Suzie Streeter, white female, born on March 9th, 1973. She's 5'2", and she's only 102 pounds at the time that she disappeared. She has brown eyes, straight bleached blonde shoulder-length hair. She has large teeth with no dental work. She has a 3.5-inch scar on the top of her right forearm and a small tumor on the left corner of her mouth, which gives the appearance that she has something in her mouth. She worked at a local movie theater and was going to go to cosmetology school in the fall. She took special classes as she had trouble reading and perhaps may have been dyslexic.
Any information about the case should go to the Springfield Police Department. The number is 417-864-1810, or Springfield Crime Stoppers, which is 417-869-TIPS, TIPS. How 3 women go missing baffles me. I have thought about this, and I just can't make it make sense. What throws me off even more is that all 3 of their cars were there. Each of these women had their own car, and each car was at the house, which I'm inclined to say if someone knew Sherrill or Stacy or Suzie and planned this, why would they do it when there was an extra car at the house? Because only 2 of them live there. But I just can't even wrap my head around how that happened.